Well, hello everyone, and thank you once again for joining me for another episode of the Mr. Healthy Habits Show. I want to remind you all right here off the bat once again to please check out my Instagram at philosophical.reminders. I post a lot of great content on there, similar to what you'll hear on this podcast daily. A lot of daily reminders about how to approach life, how to approach the day, to help you find a more peaceful, content, and happy approach to life. And today we are going to continue our discussion on Buddhist philosophy. In the previous episode, we went over the three fundamental basic principles of Buddhist philosophy, as I interpreted it, that are really at the end of the day all that we need to know in life in order to approach it peacefully and happily. And those three things are: everything is impermanent, the fact that we are fundamentally selfless, and everything is also interdependent. Now, at the heart of it, I personally believe that these are really the only three things that we need to know, is that we are selfless. There really isn't anyone at the wheel that's making decisions for or against us. And we are not making decisions that we have to look back on later and beat ourselves up for not being the people that we wish that we were. Because at the end of the day, we're selfless anyway. I mean, we're just a collection of experiences and influences and stardust. I mean, that's really all that's there. So there's really not a lot of point in looking back thinking, man, I wish I should have done this differently, or toiling about the decisions that we have to make going forward into the future. Because I mean, it's in a large respect, it's really out of our hands. And this concept that everything is impermanent, everything decays, everything changes, everything will die and be reborn. And that's just the nature of things. We change with every single experience that enters our life. It fundamentally shifts us and alters the trajectory that our life is on. And that is just the nature of things. There's a lot of peace and contentment to be found within this philosophy. I mean, it allows us to not beat ourselves up and not stress about the future. And the third aspect, which I would argue is probably the most important, is the fact that everything is interdependent. Everything is linked together in this cause and effect nexus. Everything that happens to us doesn't necessarily happen to us because there is no us for it to happen to. We are selfless. It's just events colliding with other events and creating new events and shifting and shaping things as we go along. It's like if you take a building and you demolish it and let it fall, it's only going to fall one way. There's not two different ways that it can fall. Physics is going to determine how that building falls. Every single piece of dust that floats away into the air, every single piece of dust that hits the floor and crumbles into multiple pieces is all going to be determined by science and physics. I mean, you can really calculate exactly how that building is going to collapse with enough information. When bad things happen in our lives or when good things happen in our lives, it's very much the same dynamic here at play. It very much is physics and stardust. That really is all that it is. There is a cause and effect nexus of people right now in the world that are going about their lives, that are responding to things as they happen, that are going to get on the road later because of this system of interdependency in a manner that they happen to get on the road, whether they're late, whether they're on time, whether they have to go to a different place, whether they have to go to the same place. And just the same, because of the interdependency in our lives, we are very much going to get on the road with the same mindset at the same time and trying to achieve the same goals. And everything is just going to collide together and either flow or crash or one way or the other. And it really is out of our hands how this is going to play out. It really is a matter of stardust and physics. And I've used in the previous episode the analogy of my mother's car accident that she was involved in when I was 14. She survived that accident, thankfully. But when you look at it, a car collided with her from behind, and she came out the back windshield and landed on the freeway. Now, you can argue that God protected her, God saved her, and I am thankful to God for having saved her. But also, at the heart of it, physics determined that she was going to survive that. It was science. It was a matter of speed and force and velocity and impact and the way that she hit the freeway floor and the people that were around her that contributed to this cause and effect nexus that decided that she was going to survive. And just the same, it would have been science had she not survived. It would have been science that dictated that no, a human body cannot sustain this kind of trauma and it's time to go. It's very much impersonal. It's not something that happens to us. It's just nature. It's just science and stardust. That's really all there is at the heart of this. And this could allow us to detach ourselves from the suffering. Now, detachment is a deep principle within much of philosophy, in particular Buddhist philosophy, where we need to detach ourselves from things like this. But a lot of people conflate detachment with apathy and to just not care. And that's not what I'm saying here. And I don't believe that was really ever the message of the Buddha or of Lao Tzu or of the Stoics. I believe we should embrace these things and we should accept them and let them shape our lives and appreciate the beauty that is the story. But also, we can detach ourselves from this in a way that will allow ourselves not to say, woe is me, not to feel bad for ourselves. I mean, I don't feel bad for what had happened to us or the life that we had led after that. There is no feeling sorry for us. One of the most important things that I've learned growing up is to know when you're just feeling sorry for yourself and to guard against that. That is really what we need to detach ourselves from, is not from the beauty of the life that we live, but from the needlessness, the suffering, the things that hold us back from living a more fulfilled life. Because we could have very well have used this circumstance to feel sorry for ourselves and prevent us from living a meaningful life. But those are the kind of things that you have to detach yourself from, not from the experience that was. I mean, that was a very profound thing that happened in our lives and not something that we should get. And it's one of the things that has allowed me to sit here on this podcast and share what is a rather beautiful story with you guys. But enough for a recap of the previous episode. Now we are going to get into the practice of Buddhism as I've interpreted it. I mean, I'm going to share here with you right now that I'm far from any kind of Buddhist scholar or philosophical scholar. This is just what I have learned, what has shaped me, what has helped me, that I am now turning around and sharing with you guys. So if we can continue on with the discussion, we are going to get into the Four Noble Truths, the Four Noble Truths that shape Buddhist practice. And the first of these noble truths is all of life is suffering. All of this, everything that we see is a type of suffering, a form of suffering, or is experiencing some type of suffering. Now, I have my own interpretation on this. I mean, I'm not sure if I quite believe that that is the way this message is to be interpreted. And I'll share my own personal thoughts here with you on this in a moment once we get a little bit deeper into the topic. Now, as I understand, there are three different types of suffering that are pervasive throughout Buddhist philosophy. There is basic suffering, as in, oh, a spider bit me and it hurts and it itches now, or I have a headache, or I'm not feeling well, or I'm sore from my workout and my body aches when I get up. That's just a basic type of suffering that we all tend to experience. And then there is the suffering of change. Everything changes. We get used to things being a certain way in our lives, and we resist any kind of change. We resist any kind of change because, I mean, let's face it, the old saying, the devil that you know is better than the devil that you don't know. And we fear change because it means that we have to change and we don't know what we're losing or what we're gaining in the process. And everything is in constant change. And so since everything is in constant change, all of life is suffering in many respects. But and again, we're going to get into my interpretation of this here in a moment. And next, there is the suffering of pervasive conditioning. Now, that is an interesting one, and one that I'm going to borrow a analogy that was used by Professor Jay Garfield from the Great Courses lecture, A Meaningful Life, or How to Live a Meaningful Life. And in that lecture, he uses this analogy and states it this way. I mean, assume that I'm a travel agent. And you come to me to plan out a vacation. And I tell you, well, there's this cool little island here off the Pacific, we can send you there. Occasionally, it's hit by storms. A tsunami happens every once in a while and will wipe out the place and sweep people off. And occasionally, disease will break out there and people will get sick and die. Sometimes the food goes bad and you just can't help those things. Things break down on occasion, and sometimes there's tourists there that can be a bit rowdy or whatnot. And, they can ruin the situation for the people there. But, for the most part, it's a really nice place. Do you want to go there? Most people would say, of course not. That sounds crazy. But the argument of the Buddha here in terms of the suffering of pervasive conditioning is that's the ticket that we bought when we were born. That is the ticket that we bought when we were born. That is just the way the world works. That's where we are right now. And this, likewise, is a form of suffering. Now, this one may be true and may be at the heart of a lot of Buddhist philosophy and theology, but I really have a tough time accepting this one, that all of life is suffering. I mean, I don't really believe all of life is suffering. All of life doesn't have to be suffering. Suffering is a concept created in the mind. It is nothing more than a biochemical release within our body that we then interpret as suffering and project that onto the world, onto reality. I don't believe that all of life is suffering, and I'm not sure if really that's a proper interpretation of it or what he even meant to say. I would argue that all of life is struggle. All of life is struggle. All of life is not suffering, but all of life is struggle. But struggle is not the same thing as suffering. Suffering is a pervasive thing that is really, it has negative connotations about it. It's really something that doesn't make you feel good. Struggle by chance or by comparison is a different type of thing. I mean, you can struggle and approach that struggle with a smile on your face and with confidence. Everything is struggle. I mean, getting out of the car is a struggle. You can gauge the level of struggle, but it still is a form of struggle. Everything in life that we do, everything that we learn, every task that we take on, the drive home from work, it's all a struggle. But that doesn't mean that it's suffering. It doesn't have to be a source of suffering. I mean, my father, by example, I've seen him face many struggles with a smile on his face and a song in his heart and singing as he does it. And that is one of the things that I believe that we can take away from this podcast, from this theory, from this concept, is that just because there is struggle doesn't mean that we have to suffer. So that is my interpretation on it, and how I have changed this theory or dogma into something that is more useful, more beneficial to me, because I just can't go about life with this concept that all of life is suffering. That just sounds too depressive and too negative for me. I can agree that all of it is struggle, but it is the struggle that shapes us and that makes us stronger. It is facing those struggles with a jolly attitude and a chipper mood that inspires others, that inspires me. And that is how I want my kids to face life going forward, is to know that even though you struggle, that doesn't mean that you have to suffer. You face that struggle with a jolly attitude and a positive mindset, and you inspire and you be inspired. So we'll get a little bit further into this after this quick break. I thank you again for joining me here and hope to see you on the other side. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for joining me again on the other side of that break. Now, moving on with the episode and continuing with the Four Noble Truths. The second of the Noble Truths is that there is a cause of suffering. So our first Noble Truth, going back to it, is that all of life is suffering or struggle. And the second is that there is a cause. There is a reason why we experience suffering. It is very much part of the cause and effect nexus that we inhabit as the world and the environment around us. Now, as Buddhist philosophy goes, there are three different causes of suffering. There is attraction and aversion, and then there is primal confusion. Now, attraction is, in Buddhist philosophy, one of the primary sources of suffering. It comes from desire. It comes from attachment. It comes from wanting something in our lives that we can't have. Or rather, wanting something that we don't currently possess in the present moment. I want to be thinner. That's a form of suffering. I want to have a better job. That is a form of suffering. I want a new car. I want this. I want that. It's these desires, these attachments that are a primary source of suffering in life and in the world. And in many cases, you can link a lot of instances of mass suffering to attraction and aversion. You can say that very much so most wars, most crime, most of the suffering that's pervasive throughout the world is due to wanting something that we don't possess in the present. It's due to attraction towards something rather than just learning to live and let live and live in harmony and be at peace with what we currently have in the moment. It comes from failure to appreciate what we have and desiring what we do not have. Now, there is a paradox here with this one that I will have to acknowledge. Desire and attachments are forms of suffering, but then again, at the same time, it's desires in life that can compel us to do great things. So, what's the difference? I mean, where is the line between desiring something that is going to be beneficial and desiring something that is really just a form of suffering. And in many respects, there isn't a line. I mean, if you desire a better version of yourself, a thinner, a lighter version of yourself, there is still a level of discontent with who you currently are. And that can compel you to go forward and create a better you. But regardless, it is still a form of suffering. And the principles behind Buddhist philosophy are to eliminate suffering. So one thing that I picked up from other lectures that I've heard is when you go forth with a desire, you want to make sure that you are doing so out of compassion for yourself, out of compassion for those around you. You want to make sure that you are pursuing a goal because you love yourself and you want to see better for yourself, and because you love those around you and you want to give a better version of those of yourself to those around you. Yes, in a sense, this can be construed as a form of suffering as well, because you're still wanting something. You're still wanting something that you don't have. But the important thing here to remember is wanting something that you don't have and striving forward for it is a form of struggle, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a form of suffering. It doesn't necessarily have to be a form of suffering. It's only when we use this to bludgeon ourselves, to get down on ourselves, that it really becomes a form of suffering. You can approach weight loss and whatever goals you have, whether it's finding a better job, with a song in your heart and a smile on your face, and strive to create a better life for yourself, and realize that struggle is going to be part of it. There will always be struggle involved, in particular with things such as weight loss. That's all part of it. I mean, you really literally have to burn it off, and there is struggle that is involved every single time you step into the gym, every single time you practice healthy eating habits. The key to it, however, is to understand that your struggle doesn't necessarily have to be suffering. I mean, you very much can approach struggle with a positive attitude and know that it's because of these struggles that our lives have value to those around us. I mean, people look at you and the struggles that you have faced and value that in you. So one of these days, when we're older, our kids will turn around and idolize us to their kids for the struggles that we face, not because of our suffering, but rather because of the struggles that we were able to overcome. And it is when we have faced those struggles with a positive attitude that we will really, really inspire people to do the same, and how to live a better life and create a better life for themselves and their children. And that's a very valuable tool that can be passed down through generations. You see, you should never pursue a goal out of discontent for yourself or discontent for those around you. If you want to make positive changes in your life in terms of weight loss or finding a new job or whatnot, be careful to do that out of compassion for yourself and not out of self-loathing. Don't look at yourself and say, I hate the way that I look. I hate the way that I feel. I want to make changes. Look at yourself and say, I want to better myself. I care about myself. I want to experience life in another way. This isn't because I loathe myself. You have to appreciate yourself regardless of your circumstances. And that doesn't mean that you can't move forward. There are two ways at the end of the day to move forward. I mean, you can move forward out of self-loathing, or you can move forward because you care and appreciate yourself, and because you care for and appreciate those around you. One will lead to happiness. One is going to lead to more suffering. One will be a source of suffering and at the end of the day lead to more suffering. If you compel yourself to move forward and you practice letting discontent be your driving motivational factor behind your compellation to move forward, all you're doing is practicing moving forward in the wrong way. And when you do eventually reach there and you do want to move forward further, the only way you're going to know how to do it is with more self-loathing. And that is just going to create a downward spiral where you might just never be content with yourself. You might never look back and be able to fully enjoy the fruits of your labor. So go about your goals out of compassion and caring for yourself. I mean, that is one big piece of advice that I can offer through this philosophy that I've just learned myself on my own weight loss journey. Don't move forward because of your discontentment with what you see in the mirror. Move forward because you want to inspire, because you care about yourself. I can't stress this enough. Now, the second form of suffering among this concept here is aversion, attraction, and aversion. Aversion is not wanting something that you currently have. I have an extra 20 pounds. I don't want that. That is a source of suffering. I don't want this car. I don't want this job. I don't want this, that, and the other. Those are all forms of suffering. Just the same, there are ways to move past this, and that is simply through acceptance. Simply through acceptance and understanding that it is all not personal and that this is just the way that the world has worked out to this point. It doesn't mean it's always going to be this way. Don't wish it away. Don't look at it like it's forever. Things happen in our lives, things that we don't wish to happen. That's aversion. That's getting something that we don't want. In Buddhist philosophy, primary sources of suffering: attraction, wanting something that we don't have, and aversion, getting something that we don't want. You see, this falls very much in line with the theory of science and biology, and in that we are just responding. We are just responding to what comes into our lives and what leaves our lives is something that we want or something that we don't want. And at the end of the day, this is human nature. This is human nature. And I realize the argument, okay, this is human nature, so what do we do about it? But there is a acknowledgement that we have to make here, and that is that some people do tend to do this more than others. Some people desire more. Some people have stronger aversions than others. It comes down to life experiences and influences that have shaped us into the type of people that can either let go of these things or can't. And wherever you are currently in this practice, it doesn't mean that you're doomed to stay there. That's very much not the case. I mean, everything is impermanent and everything changes. So as influences enter your life, as you practice letting go of attachments and moving forward out of self-compassion rather than self-loathing, and accepting aversions that come into our lives and learning to live with them or change them if we can, but not change them from this aspect of self-loathing for them or for our circumstances. As we practice these concepts and ideas, we'll get better at them. We'll get better at them. I mean, I don't think we'll ever achieve a state where we are completely attractionless or aversionless and aren't affected by these circumstances surrounding human nature. I mean, I think it's always going to be a part of us. But with practice, you can lead a life where these things just really aren't going to affect you as much. And that doesn't mean that you won't have any drive or ambition. You very much can have your drive and ambition. The only difference is it won't be a source of suffering for you. It will be a source of pride, a source of self-compassion, a source of inspiration, rather than a source of suffering. I mean, going back to the car accident in my mother, I mean, nobody wants that to happen in their lives. Nobody wants to get cancer or have any kind of disease, but this is all part of a cause and effect nexus that was predetermined long before we even set foot on the scene. It's very much not personal and just the way the dominoes have to fall in order for the universe to work. Knowing this offers us a level of acceptance that we can practice going forward. So moving on now to the third source of suffering in human nature and Buddhist philosophy, primal confusion. Now, what exactly is primal confusion? Primal confusion is the failure to understand that everything is impermanent, that we are fundamentally selfless, and everything is interdependent. It's when we fail on recognizing these three things. It's when we fail to see this in life and to understand that we are selfless, that everything is impermanent, and everything is interdependent, that we suffer. It is when attraction and aversion or whatnot hits us in life, and we fail to understand these three principles that basically work the universe. That is primal confusion. It is when we fail to understand these three things and we lose focus that we start to posit things onto reality, that we start to posit identityhood onto people and things around us rather than just seeing them as part of the universe that they are not in control of. You know, we tend to see people and give them an identity and assume that they are this conscious being that is making decisions about how the way they want the world to work. And if they don't want the world to work the way that you do, now there is resentment. And that resentment, that strife, that source of suffering exists because we fail to see that they are selfless, that they are interdependent, that they are impermanent. When things happen to us, we fail to see that the thing that happened is selfless, that it is also interdependent, and that it is impermanent. And that is primal confusion. That is one of the big messages behind Buddhist philosophy, is the perspective on what happens in the people around us, to understand that we need to keep these three things in mind. And that is why in the previous episode, I titled it, The Only Three Things That You Need to Know. And really at the heart of it, the only three things that we need to know is that everything is impermanent, everything is selfless, and everything is interdependent. Now, the third of the noble truths is that we can eliminate suffering. We can work on it. We can adopt a practice in life that will lessen our burdens and lessen the suffering that we experience. I've very much laid out a number of different ways that we can do this throughout this podcast and throughout many of my podcasts. One is by realizing that suffering is just a concept in the mind, and really what we are experiencing is struggle. And struggle doesn't have to be synonymous with suffering. They do not have to go hand in hand. As a matter of fact, they can be just the opposite. I mean, you can see your struggles as a source of pride, as a source of good feelings, and a source of positivity. You just have to practice it. You just have to remember those three things: impermanence, interdependence, and selflessness, and practice, and you can achieve it. So I mean, there is a cause of suffering, But likewise, there still also is very much something that we can do about it. I mean, we can eliminate it from our lives. I mean, maybe not completely, because at the end of the day, we are a human. We are a human. I mean, we're not Buddhas or anything like that, but we can practice it. I mean, there definitely is something to be said for, we don't all suffer on the same plane, some of us more than others. And you can argue circumstances and whatnot, but then you can take two people within the same circumstances and one suffers less than the other. And that is because of past experiences and influences. And other words, a practice in life. It may not be a conscious practice. It may not be something that they're conscious of that they're even practicing, but something that they very much are practicing. And just the same, if you tend to be a type of negative person, you're practicing negativity unknowingly. Now, the fourth of the Noble Truths is the prescription for suffering. What do we do about suffering in terms of Buddhist philosophy? Now, there is the Eightfold Path, which is the prescription that the Buddha offers, which is how we can eliminate suffering from our lives. But at this moment, I think I'm tapped out of time here, you guys, and we will save the Eightfold Path for the next Mr. Healthy Habits show. I thank you guys so much here for joining me on this philosophical journey through Buddhist philosophy. I'd like to remind you all to please follow me on Instagram at philosophical.reminders. The template's been changing and the page is ever evolving, and I'm quite proud of it, quite happy of the way that it's turned out. So please check it out when you have a chance. And follow me wherever you're listening to this podcast. Please subscribe. It really helps me. It helps the channel. Go back and take a look at my previous episodes. I've got a lot of content up there and a lot of really good stuff. I'm probably going to be putting these things out now once a week on Mondays to give myself more time to work on my Instagram, more time to dive into study and to bring a better version of myself to you guys. And I thank you so much here for joining me again. Now, you guys take care and have many blessings upon you. Appreciate you guys.